Hello everybody, Melanie here and welcome back to my channel. Right, so this video today is going to cover guilt. How to manage guilt post-breakup, especially if you've broken up with someone dysfunctional, possibly personality disordered. It's very intense, not just the relationship but the breakup afterwards. And I recently had someone emailing me asking for advice about how to manage guilt when you've broken up with them. For example, how to handle the guilt of knowing that you've left this person in pain, knowing that your ex likely won't get the support that he or she once had when you were in their life. It can be quite hard to walk away from that, especially if you have a heart, if you're a compassionate, caring and nurturing person. It's especially hard to walk away from someone who's in pain. And let's face it, BPD is a trauma response. You don't just wake up one day in bed with it. It's a combination of having the genetics from your family members and experiencing trauma and abuse. So often your borderline ex will be a traumatized person. And I'd wager to say that every person with BPD has PTSD or CPTSD. That is not to say that everyone with PTSD and CPTSD has BPD. No, but it is a trauma response. And so those who have a personality disorder are very much likely then to be traumatized and have PTSD and CPTSD. And it's hard to walk away from someone who's in pain when you care about them. It's really hard. So in this video, I'm going to do my best to help you discern what's yours and what's theirs. I will help you transform the guilt that you're currently feeling to make it more manageable. And finally, talking about the consequences of going back to a dysfunctional partner, not just a partner, but a friendship, a family member, because of guilt. So I'm going to endeavour to cover all of this. And as always, if you've got any comments or suggestions or any feedback, I would love to hear from you. Do email me any of your comments or suggestions. My email address is in the video description. All right, so let's get started. Let's take a moment to pause and think about what feelings actually are and how they serve us. They aim to give us information about our environment. For example, if there is a predator, we may go into fight or flight. We may experience fear, anger. It's there to serve us. Feelings of guilt and shame are no different. And in the context of how guilt serves us, well, it tells us that A, we have some sort of conscience, and it tells us that we need to make reparations so that we can be included back in the group. We are pack animals, and when we are ousted from the group, this does have a detrimental effect to us. And so feelings of guilt, whether we've done something wrong that meant that we have been ousted, we've been rejected from the group, whether it's the group that you're in or it's a relationship. When we experience feelings of guilt, it's there to serve us, to tell us that we've done something wrong and we need to make amends in order to make things better again. If we didn't experience this, then we would end up just hurting people without realizing the consequences of our actions. And ultimately, as sociable creatures who belong in packs, there needs to be harmony, there needs to be cooperation, and we can't survive rejected from the group. Think about our ancestors. They could not have survived outside of a group. They need to be included in the pack to survive. And so these feelings are there to keep us in relationship so that we can look at ourselves and make amends, make reparations, so that we can mature, basically. When we feel guilty about something that we've done to hurt another, it's natural to want to make reparations, to make things better. And sometimes this helps. To do something, to say I'm sorry, to make amends. But after a breakup, it's not often possible, if at all possible. You can't make amends with the other person. Perhaps too much has been said, too much has been done. Maybe you've got no contact now. Maybe your ex just doesn't want to see you. Maybe it'll make things worse to still be in their life. So if you're feeling like you want to make reparations, but you know that you can't and it's not the best idea, you can still make reparations by doing something good for someone else. Act of kindness for someone else, whether that's for a family member, for a friend, to take time out of your day to be helpful for someone else, to do good for someone else. that in turn makes that other person happier. Perhaps you've really helped them out and they're grateful. And to be able to create good energy does help lift you, helps lift the other person. And it's a way to manage the feelings of wanting to need to do something good, to want to make reparations. Perhaps it's not for a friend or family, maybe it's volunteering. Maybe it's just going to your local river and cleaning it up. To show kindness and love, even though you can't with your ex, it does help, in my opinion. Look, if you're feeling guilty, at least it means that you have a conscience. You have the capacity to feel guilty, and that should actually be celebrated. It's managing this and not letting guilt from the past overtake you, and then it clouds your decision about what to do in the here and now. And this is what I want to help you with, discerning what is yours and what is theirs. Now, any breakup is hard enough as it is for both the person breaking up with the other and for the person who is being dumped. If you have any sort of compassion, if you care about your partner, it is hard to see them in pain, regardless of whether it's the right decision to do this. To feel bad, to feel guilty, to feel in pain, it is all normal and part and parcel of the process of saying goodbye. The thing is after dating someone who has BPD, for example, they struggle with managing their emotions. Emotional dysregulation is at the crux of BPD. It is very hard for them to deal with what they would consider bad emotions or negative emotions. I don't want to use these labels here. Of course, different feelings have different energetic states to them, but none should be ignored or repressed or denied. They all serve a valuable function. It's about how you handle them, how you work with them. And for people who have BPD, often they themselves weren't taught how to manage their feelings, more than likely because they themselves had parents who didn't know how to manage their feelings, let alone teach and guide a young child how to manage their own. So your BPD partner who really struggles with feeling bad about themselves and not knowing how to manage their feelings, so they can go from 0 to 100 in whichever feeling that they are currently dwelling in. They struggle, they really do struggle with putting a lid on it. They do tend to be up on themselves a lot. And so when they're experiencing feelings of guilt for about something that they've done, what could happen is that they don't know how to handle this. And so they will blame you. They will find something that they can blame you for so that you can feel guilty, so that it's you're the one who's feeling guilty. They can then no longer have to sit with their guilt. It is very hard having guilt displaced onto you, and it's easier to handle when you realize what's going on. When someone doesn't know how to handle that aspect of themselves, when they don't know how to manage feelings of guilt, when they're in a place when they feel really, really terrible, so many things can happen, and one of them is blaming you so that you feel guilty. You become the scapegoat. You are the target now. A lot of it is just denying it as well and wanting to escape, to dissociate from this feeling, whether this is through taking drugs, cheating on you by sleeping around, doing something that just numbs the feeling of guilt. And often addictions do go hand in hand with BPD as well. So it's easy then for someone who is traumatized, for someone who has BPD, for example, to just go on a bender and numb themselves out so that they don't have to deal with the painful memories that guilt brings up, so that they don't have to deal with feelings of shame that also come up about who they are. And it's easy for anyone to go into a vicious cycle of thinking that the past is happening again, and having mum or dad or siblings or people from the past having their voices loudly shouting in your head, like, you know, you're a bad person, you're a terrible person, and having all sorts of memories come up. So it's understandable then how someone with BPD would want to just do what it takes to not feel this way. And this is unfortunately the painful situation that people with BPD are in, that they can't stand the feeling of guilt and the painful memories and the thoughts that come up. They want to feel better, they want to escape it, but really the only way is to feel it, to sit with it, to let it transform you, to listen to what the guilt is saying. But the problem is that when you're deeply traumatized, it's hard to discern what is the past and what's happening now. And especially if you have a tendency to blame yourself, to beat up upon yourself. Perhaps you've internalized a very harsh parent who used to blame you for everything, and that gets kicked up whenever feelings of guilt, pain, anger, sadness, whatever it is, whatever triggers those memories, those thoughts, it makes it hard for the person who is experiencing this to discern what is actually happening right now. So as a result, if you are dating someone like this, perhaps you have had a lot of things thrown at you and you were blamed for things that weren't even relevant maybe to the current argument. It's a way of them not knowing how to manage realizing they've made mistakes, that they are less than. To them, if they've done something wrong, then they are very bad people. They're quite split about what's good and what's bad, not just with other people, but also within themselves. It's very hard for them to sit with feelings of, I'm a bad person, I've done wrong. And perhaps their partner have said, it's okay, you're not a bad person, but they still can't listen. They are still stuck with this image that they have. And often it's them feeling guilty that is the instigator for them wanting to leave you. Perhaps they actually do realize what they are doing and they just can't stand to see that in themselves, and they don't actually want to see you hurting. They can't stand to see who they are when they are with you, and so they will leave. They don't want to keep holding on to these feelings of guilt. So sometimes then it's easier just to quit, to leave. So it's not a personal reflection on you, but instead their ability to survive chaos and their ability to manage their own feelings and their own experiences. So going forward, it is best to learn how to discern what is yours and what is theirs. We all make mistakes, and especially when we're in challenging situations, we see the worst of ourselves sometimes. So understandably, we would feel guilty if you've seen yourself act at your worst, especially if you haven't really acted like this in a relationship before. And on top of that, have someone just berate you. It is a common story I've heard when my clients share with me that they're trying to have a mature conversation in which they own their mistakes, hoping for their borderline partner to join in, but instead the partner just points the finger and says, yes, you have been like this, blame, 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 blame. And it's feeding the inner narrative that they are the victim. So it can be very frustrating, and sometimes it seems like it's just not helpful. It's like you are trying to have an adult conversation about this and it's just falling on deaf, immature ears. You can't force someone to really listen to what you're saying. You really can't. Take some time to really think, well, what is mine and what is theirs? What are your mistakes? What are the reasons that led to you to make these mistakes? And how can you make reparations? Most of the time, if not all of the time, it can't be with your ex anymore. How can you make reparations so that you're not going to do this again? Now, for most people, they won't be able to go back to their ex to make reparations. And as painful as it is to accept, this is part of the journey of managing guilt, to accept that you've made mistakes, to accept that you can't go back and undo them. Some mistakes, you just can't undo them. Too much has happened, perhaps the trust is gone. It's learning to sit with that and accept that, as hard as it is. And one tip that really helps, I find, is to wish this person just love and light. It can be as simple as just 5 seconds. You just wish this person well. Wherever you are, I hope you're doing well. Send them love and light in whichever way you want, and just drop it. Is it going to serve you if you're going to go into a cycle of reflecting upon the past and in the inability to go back and do something about it? Instead, you're just rewatching the events over and over again. And sometimes when we do this, the events start to change and our memories end up being morphed and shaped by how we're feeling when we're recollecting them. How does that help? How is this helping you? Reflect upon your actions so that you know to do things differently. Maybe you feel guilty about your actions because of how you acted, And this is now a wake-up call for you to really look at yourself and to see, how can I be different? Where do I need to change? Where do I need to grow up? Discerning what is yours, what are your mistakes, and committing to doing something different this time. And this, in my opinion, is the best way to make a commitment to yourself that going forward, you are no longer going to be making these mistakes again. And it's not just saying it once and forgetting about it. It's really looking at yourself. If this is a habit that you're in, if this is something that you keep doing, it means that it's going to be a daily effort of you opening your eyes and keeping them open, taking the time to make a commitment to improve upon yourself so that you don't have to go through this again. For many of my clients, for example, they often struggle with setting healthy boundaries with their partner, and people-pleasing aspects of themselves tend to take over, and often it's a reenactment of the past. So if you're feeling guilty about your actions, maybe this is an opportunity for you to really look at yourself and think, do I want to keep living like I was in the past? Or do I want to live for myself now? Living for other people versus living for yourself. What does that mean? It means taking time to find out who you really are and what it's like to set boundaries and to practice this on a daily basis so that you're better prepared for the next friendship, let alone relationship. So discerning what's yours and what's your ex's is a vital step in moving forward and managing feelings of guilt, because guilt can get very excessive. And if you dated someone with BPD, chances are that they've pointed the finger quite a few times and maybe you've taken on more guilt than you should have needed to. Now, one thing that is often an issue with my clients is that they dated someone who was really cute, very petite, tiny, adorable person who can act quite pitiful, meaning that it's easy to pity them and feel sorry for them. And this ends up pulling on their heartstrings, perhaps a bit too much, and they end up placating, they end up taking on the guilt and apologizing and accepting all the blame. And you know that they're a good person deep down despite everything that's gone down. And it's in human nature to want to protect things that are vulnerable and that are cute. Studies have shown that humans do want to protect and look after things and people and animals that we deem as vulnerable and cute. So it means it can be really hard to leave someone when they are sad and they're being pitiful, and perhaps the rescue in you takes over, or perhaps guilt means that you end up staying with this person when you don't actually really want to. Which leads me on to the next thing I want to talk about, how fog, that is, fear, obligation, and guilt, can keep you going back into unhealthy relationships. When you genuinely care about this person, even though perhaps this relationship is really destroying you, and it's the feeling of fear of what will happen if you leave, what will happen to them. Perhaps they're not very good at looking after themselves, perhaps they don't have much support. A sense of obligation because you've been with them maybe for so long, you've known them for a long time, or you just feel obligated to look after this person. And guilt about you leaving them and instigating this pain. I can't say anything that's going to make this fog go away. All I can say is that be careful that you don't end up enabling them. It is so easy to give in, to placate, when someone that you care about is in pain. And if you feel guilty, if you feel obliged, if you're scared about what will happen, and this means that you go against what deep down you feel is the right idea, and instead you stay, how is this serving you? Is it not possible that feelings of bitterness and resentment might come up? How is it serving your partner? Perhaps they end up going back to the old ways and nothing ever changes. You become resentful and you're enabling them and nothing really changes. Sometimes people need to fall on their own sword, as painful as it is. And sometimes it just requires you being the stronger person and trusting that it will be okay. They are on their journey, no matter what the journey is. that it is important for you and your own mental health, that if you want to leave, that you do this and you don't stick around just to make someone happy at the expense of your own happiness. It will have an impact on them. So if you can relate to being in the fog, perhaps this isn't the first time. Is this a habit? Is this a habit that you want to keep practicing with people? Whether it's with family members, friends, loved ones, relationships. Do you have a habit to let the fog take over and you end up sticking around when you don't really want to? How is this impacting you in the short term, in the long term? How would it benefit you to do things differently this time? Imagine you doing things differently, maybe sticking to your guns and perhaps being more assertive and being more assertive with your boundaries and what you want to do, and sticking to what you want to do, to experience guilt, to accept that it's there, and to tell yourself it's okay. It means that I have a conscience, and that it's okay to move on, even though you've done things, even though you can't go back to that person and say, I'm sorry, and for them to actually listen, even though you can't go back and make things different, to accept it, to wish that person well, and to let it go, to understand what are the lessons that you can learn from this relationship, to really look at yourself. I mean, this is the gem of a dysfunctional relationship and the aftermath of the breakdown, in my opinion. It's being honest with yourself. It's a really sobering experience to wake up. Are you the kind of person who's an enabler? Are you the kind of person that thrives in being in codependent relationships? I mean, all relationships have a healthy aspect of codependency to some extent, but when it's unhealthy codependency and you end up seeking out people who keep repeating habits of breaking your heart, of being really intense, you forgetting about who you are and doing everything for the other person, and then it ends up just falling apart, and you're dealing with all this guilt and shame and pain. If this is a habit, to really look at yourself. Why is this a habit? When did this first start happening? What can I do now differently so that this isn't going to keep being a habit? The more self-awareness you can bring into your life, the more likely you are to make changes so that you don't keep repeating past mistakes. And ultimately, this is a great way in the long run to deal with feelings of guilt as well as feelings of shame, so that you can look back on your life and think, I've actually really come a long way since that disastrous relationship. You can therefore give the relationship meaning. It meant that it transformed you and it opened your eyes so that you are where you are now and you're happy with it. This, in my opinion, is a great way of dealing with guilt from the past and making peace with what's happened in the past, because you've given it meaning and you have used the opportunity of the crisis to self-improve. So going forward with managing feelings of guilt is to be better at giving yourself a reality check. And that is to be more conscious about when you go into any vicious cycle. You can stop yourself and thinking, am I going into the past? Am I engaging in thoughts and stories and dramas in my own head based on what's happened in the past? How is this serving me? Is this just getting me all worked up and getting me into a state where I feel pitiful? Is this getting me into a state where I'm feeling overly guilty and I'm really panicked? It's easy to forget what's actually happening when you are caught in the thick of an intense emotion. So to be able to give yourself a reality check, learning to breathe, catching yourself, practicing mindfulness. I'm not going to go into it too much here, but talk about it in all my videos, the ability to catch yourself when you are slipping in to old ways of being and realizing that you've got a choice. You don't need to go there again. To be able to discern what's happened in the past and what's happening now is crucial moving forward, so that you can also discern what's yours and what's your partner's. Therefore, it's easier, it's more manageable to work with this, to make changes. When you've taken on all the burdens and all the mistakes and all the problems and guilt of your ex and your family and your friends like that, it's too much, it's overwhelming. No one can deal with all of that. And if there's something you find yourself doing, well, why is that? Were you the scapegoat of your family growing up? I did make a video in the past about scapegoating. I highly recommend watching that if you can relate. It's up to you to choose to no longer be the scapegoat, and that is finding your voice again. And in doing so, you may be faced with feelings of guilt. And this is normal. This is a test. And ultimately, it's transforming guilt like this into existential guilt, transforming neurotic guilt into existential guilt. What I mean by that is, with neurotic guilt, guilt from the past, and that has become toxic. That is not serving you at all. And in fact, it's unconsciously driving you into situations and relationships in which you are reenacting the past and you are having your guilt confirmed back to you. To transform that into existential guilt, that is guilt at not living as you should, as your authentic self. Instead, it's guilt at living to please others, living as the adaptive false self. This kind of guilt, this shift from neurotic to existential, have a think about it. It's less condemning. Guilt at not living authentically, it encourages me to live authentically, as opposed to neurotic guilt, where I'm just sitting with thoughts of what my parents had told me in the past and reliving stuff from the past. And it's a lot more toxic, painful, and harder to bear. All of us can transform this. We can all shift, and it's a matter of perspective and practice. Feeling guilty about not living as your authentic self. Well, what is your authentic self? Perhaps you don't really know who you are because maybe you've come from an enmeshed family relationship growing up. Maybe you had parents who didn't allow you to have boundaries and you were an extension of them. And it can often happen then, growing up as a result, you don't really know who you are. There's many reasons why we may not know who we are. That's just one example. So often the breakup in the aftermath of a dysfunctional, painful, toxic relationship, it's a wake-up call for us to go within and to really search for who we are. So I hope that's been helpful for you. And it really does help sending someone love and light in the moment. Ho'oponopono is one that I quite like. Highly recommend looking into it. It's a Hawaiian prayer. I'm sorry, please forgive me, I love you, I thank you. And I'm not sure if I got that in the right order, but it's along those lines where you take a moment to really feel what you're thinking and saying in your mind, to apologize to the other person that you've hurt. I'm sorry for what happened. I'm sorry for how I was. I'm sorry for what I did. Please forgive me for what I've done. I thank you for the lessons learned, for the experience, for the happy memories, and for even the hard memories, because it's made me see myself. And I love you. And even though you can't say this to your ex, saying it in your mind with your heart and choosing to send them love and light and then just letting it go, it transforms you. It's for you. And it's not only stopping you from getting into a whirlpool of perhaps bitterness and anger and loathing, it's also clearing the air between you two and helping you drop it and move on, and it keeps your heart open. So let me know your thoughts, and I look forward to talking with you next time. Okay, have a lovely day, and bye for now.